Make us aware we are a sanctuary, each made holy, loved right through. With thanksgiving, we are a living sanctuary anew. Given all the demonizing of the other that we've seen happening lately, I've been thinking about what it means to belong. Social scientist Brené Brown defines true belonging as the spiritual practice of believing in and belonging to yourself so deeply that you can share your most authentic self with the world and find sacredness in both being a part of something and standing alone in the wilderness. True belonging doesn't require you to change who you are. It requires you to be who you are. True belonging takes place in our own hearts and is not, as she puts it, a reward for perfecting, pleasing, proving, or pretending, or something that others can hold hostage or take away. When we trust ourselves, we can stay centered in our integrity, even when it means facing criticism or braving the unknown. When we belong to ourselves, we carry home with us everywhere. Being a sanctuary for each other evokes a particular sense of belonging. A sanctuary is a place that's holy. For thousands of years, it's been a place of refuge when forces of oppression or violence are pursuing you. It's a place of sacred renewal. As much as anywhere can be, sanctuary is a place of safety. As we consider inclusion as a spiritual practice and what it takes to be a sanctuary, it's worth noting the definition of spirituality that emerged from Brown's research data. Spirituality is recognizing and celebrating that we are all inextricably connected to each other by a power greater than all of us, and that our connection to that power and to one another is grounded in love and compassion. And I just want to note how many beliefs fit within this definition, from absolute atheist to devoted God worshiper. It's bound up with Unitarian Universalism's core values of interdependence and pluralism. So what would it look like? What would it feel like to be a living sanctuary? I believe that first and foremost, it's a ministry of presence, authentic listening, a stance of care, curiosity rather than judgment, a space of holding. Another way to think about it is that you'd be an instrument of that greater power grounded in love and compassion. I know that for me, there are days when I'm fully at home in that kind of presence. I'm right there with the other person, focused, almost radiating acceptance from my very skin. And other days, it's all I can do to keep my attention from wandering to the latest executive order or the errand I forgot to run or the fact that I could have used another hour of sleep. Thankfully, even though the words saint and sanctuary share the same etymological roots, we need not be one to become the other. Those times when being a sanctuary for someone is harder for me to access, I fall back on strategies to ground myself so I can be a ground for love and compassion. Wiggling my toes inside my shoes, paying attention to my breathing, silently and simultaneously echoing what the other person is saying. And I know that one sounds contradictory, but it's amazingly effective. The intention to keep my heart open makes all the difference in the world. Perhaps we should take a step back. Why would you want to be a sanctuary at all? It takes concentration and care, and the world is already so much these days. And perhaps it's not your gig, and no judgment if that's the case. We each have seasons in our life when we need to receive more than we give. For me, I want to be that sacred place for others because more often than not, it feeds my soul. It allows me to tap into that power greater than myself, which nourishes me as I'm present for another. More than anything else, I feel grateful for the opportunity. With thanksgiving, we are a living sanctuary anew. I also know that there are times when I need to lean into someone else as my sanctuary, someone with whom I can share my fears and concerns. I can be vulnerable. I can be my authentic self. Having someone trustworthy like that can make a huge difference in your mental, emotional, spiritual, and even physical health. In a meta-analysis of studies on loneliness, Brown wrote, researchers found that living with air pollution increases your odds of dying early by 5%, excessive drinking, 30%, and living with loneliness, it increases our odds of dying early by 45%. Vulnerability is essential to being who we are, which is part of that definition of true belonging. Without a willingness to go out on a limb to speak your truth and let yourself be seen, really seen, a whole lot of other things become impossible. When we shut down fear and anger, we also shut down joy and love. We can't pick and choose which emotions we access. I need to be clear, though, that vulnerability between two people is different from the kind of vulnerability that entire populations are facing right now. Not everyone can open themselves up without fear of reprisal. We're seeing trans and non-binary people assailed through hateful rhetoric and hateful legislation. Immigrants are under heavy attack, blamed for all kinds of ills that have nothing to do with them. Black, Indigenous, and people of color have been targeted for centuries, as have women. The list goes on, unfortunately. All the more reason then to practice becoming sanctuaries for each other. We'll be building the skills to offer that same sense of safety and belonging to folks whose lives are literally on the line. To have someone receive your truth and really see you, or to be that person for someone else, that's sacred. The space you co-create is holy. And this is right in line with process theology, where experiences of the holy and the human are interwoven and interdependent. As theologian Catherine Keller puts it, what I become influences what you may become. Or as you might recognize in the words of Martin Luther King Jr., we are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. Keller notes, such a practice of mutuality requires a depth of self. My well-being gets caught up willy-nilly in that of the others, so my vulnerability also deepens. That might sound a little scary at first, especially for those with marginalized identities. But according to Brown's research, vulnerability is the birthplace of love, belonging, joy, empathy, innovation, and creativity. And where a sanctuary exists, those things are deeply valued, encouraged even. Do we, as a congregation, embrace vulnerability and all of the gifts it brings with it? One example might be how well we experiment with different ideas and see what we learn. Sometimes an idea will exceed our wildest expectations, and other times it'll fall flat. There's room to find new ways of doing things or to tweak old ways of doing things, all of it in support of our mission. It takes a certain level of vulnerability to be okay with imperfection. In this sanctuary, the worship team makes ourselves vulnerable every Sunday by standing at the pulpit and letting you see us, hoping, but never knowing for sure beforehand, that something of what we've poured into the service will prove to be something you need. We try out different things and then debrief afterwards to learn from what worked well or not so well. As a minister, I'm deeply committed to collaboration, which requires a high level of vulnerability, because it means I'm not entirely in control of something for which I'm responsible. But I truly believe that magic happens when people bounce ideas off each other. Magic that's rarely possible for one person to achieve while sitting alone and thinking solo thoughts. And if we're willing to be sanctuaries for each other, those efforts will be seen and felt and appreciated. Because even if they don't happen to pan out, they'll be met with love and joy because the effort itself is life-giving. Indeed, one of the enemies of vulnerability is perfectionism. I call myself a recovering perfectionist because I struggled with it for years. Anything less than 100% meant that I wasn't good enough, not just on a spelling test, but as a human being. It's a horrible way to live. 0 stars, do not recommend. Interestingly, Brené Brown also found in her research that the one variable that differed between those who always wonder if they're good enough and those whom she called the wholehearted, people who have a strong sense of love and belonging, is that the wholehearted believe that they're worthy of love and belonging. In other words, the one thing that keeps us out of connection is our fear that we're not worthy of connection. And here's where our faith tradition can help us. Because universalism teaches us that we are worthy, already and always. There's no way to escape the love and belonging that are our birthright as human beings. We can only lose track of it. In a sanctuary, though, we can be reminded of sacred truths. Make us aware we are a sanctuary, each made holy, loved right through. With thanksgiving, we are a living sanctuary anew. Let us live into the holiness that we co-create for each other. May our hearts find spaces for vulnerability. And may we always know in our bones that we are worthy of true belonging. Amen, and blessed be.